Today, friends, we have a fantastic guest with us. Michael Jochum is a highly skilled drummer and percussionist who has played on albums and tours for some of the biggest names in jazz, rock, and pop music. Welcome, Michael. It's great having you here today. Your talent and experience are truly impressive.
Like I said, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here, my brother. Thank you for having me.
What was it that drew you to the drums?
It's an interesting question because I wouldn't say that I was drawn to the drums necessarily. I would say that my interest in the drums happened by happenstance. I was over at a friend's house in Burbank, California, where I grew up, and he had just happened to have a drum set. I had no idea he had a drum kit or why he would have a drum kit. I think he was toying around with the idea of playing the drums. And I sat behind that drum kit and I picked up the drumsticks, and even though I had no idea how to play, I made my way around the drum kit and hit cymbal here and a tom there and hit the bass drum, and I knew that that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life, as crazy as that might sound. It just seemed like it was a divine intervention that brought me to Bruce Blair's house in Burbank, California, was the very beginning and the genesis of my career as a drummer.
It takes a lot of dedication, practice, and even some form of spiritual connection to learn the finer rudiments of drumming. How often did you practice in the beginning? Did you take lessons? And what is your philosophy towards drumming?
The rudimentary part of drumming is just gaining a certain amount of technical prowess on the instrument, and that takes practice. And that answers the next question in its own way, in the sense that in order to figure out what you're going to practice, you have to have a good teacher. And the relationship, I can't overstate the importance of the relationship between student and teacher in regards to any instrument or anything for that matter. It's like when you find the right teacher, everything just seems to kind of come together. And growing up in Burbank, California, I had a lot of opportunities, and there were a lot of really good teachers on the West Coast. There's a lot of talk about great teachers on the East Coast, and of course there's a ton of those. But the West Coast had its share of teachers, especially in the jazz drumming department, where there was a lot of great West Coast jazz drummers. So I first studied at ABC Music in Burbank from a teacher that was teaching there, and he really got me into the rudiments and the time playing what's called traditional grip. So playing like this instead of playing matched grip like this at the time. Turned me on to the Charlie Wilcoxon books and the Mitchell Peters books, and all the books where I honed my practicing skills on rudiments. Starting there, the spiritual connection is an interesting one, and I'm really happy that you brought it up. There's a certain kind of affinity that's necessary to be playing and dedicate yourself to any instrument, and I think you have to have that sort of affinity for the instrument first and foremost, and then letting all the technical aspect of what you do as an instrumentalist sort of filter in and integrate into that spiritual quality that music has no ego, music has no agenda, and that's the wonderful thing about it. Its mystical quality can be revealed to us if we just let it happen.
The next question is exciting for me, as I am a big fan of jazz music of all kinds. In the early 1980s, you were a member of the jazz fusion band Kittyhawk. Tell me the Kittyhawk story.
The serendipity of my meeting the guys in Kittyhawk and becoming a member of the band was quite amazing, actually. I knew that they were going to be looking for a drummer, and I didn't know Dan Bortz and Paul Edwards. So Paul Edwards is the stick player in the band Kittyhawk. Those of you not familiar, the band was a jazz fusion band starting in the late 70s, 79 actually, through. The band made it all the way through about 1985 with the help of EMI America, 2 records on EMI America. Thank you, Gary Gersh, the A&R person who believed in the band and brought us to the label. Anyway, and the band consisted of stick, Paul Edwards on stick, Daniel Bortz on stick as well, Chapman stick fretboard for you that are familiar with that, or it's an interesting tapping method that you use on the strings to produce both bass and guitar sounds, and it's an instrument of its own, and I could talk about the Chapman stick for a long time, but I won't. And Daniel Bortz played Chapman stick as well as fretless guitar that he filed down basically and made his own, and cello. He's a tremendous cello player, tremendous cellist. And Richard Elliott playing tenor, soprano, saxophones, and EWI, the electronic wind instrument, has gone on to make a fabulous career for himself as well. Anyway, I went and auditioned. I don't remember exactly where the audition space was, but it was as if they were waiting for me for 100 years to appear to them, to complete the quartet. So that's how it began, and we had a terrific run. We opened for all sorts of wonderful EMI artists because we were supported by EMI. Those are the days where a band of our ilk had tour support. We essentially rotated the same universe that the Yellow Jackets and Weather Report and Steps Ahead with Michael Brecker, even those jazz guys, as well as Joan Armatrading and George Benson and Jeff Beck. We had the opportunity to open for all of these wonderful, incredible artists, as well as carving our own niche into headlining spots all over the country. We never made it overseas. I don't know why we didn't. We should have. But the good news is that there's going to be a new Kittyhawk album coming out, interestingly enough. Hopefully by the end of July is what we're looking at right now. We've gone to great pains to make a live session with the band, a live show, come to life, and it sounds fantastic. So keep your eyes open and ears open for a new Kittyhawk project coming soon as well.
Next, you started recording sessions with well-known artists such as Ronnie Laws, Bobby Bland, and DeBarge. Can you share some of your experiences as a session player?
I've always been the kind of musician, and I knew in my early 20s that if I was going to be the kind of player that I wanted to be and do mostly recording work, which is really all I was looking at the very beginning, I would have to be extremely versatile, learn how to read well. And like I always tell younger students when they ask me, how to make a career in the music business, I always say, I ask them the question, what's the most important thing that you need to do before, you set off for a recording session in the morning? And, some people might say, I need to tune my instrument, or I need to make sure that my instruments are in good shape, or, and I say, well, all of that, but at the same time, the most important thing you can do is make sure you have plenty of gas in the car to make it on the session, to the session on time. I can remember in 1976, my very first recording session was a recording session for the television show The Love Boat. I know that's dating me quite a bit, but that is the truth. And it was an 8 a.m. call, and I had no idea what I was walking into, but what I did walk into at Evergreen Studios in Burbank was a literal army of music stands that was awaiting me, looking like they were getting ready to do battle. 100 of them, basically, because it was an entire orchestra. So imagine if I had been late to that 8 a.m. session, or if I decided that I'm just going to stroll in at 8 o'clock, and I had members of the orchestra, especially those violinists, looking at me with disdain because I put their session behind 10 or 15 or a half an hour minutes. So being on time was important. So from doing a lot of TV and film work from the get-go, Love Boat, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Joni Loves Chachi, Hawaii Five-0. I could go on and on. Three's Company, Cheers, on to shows like Roseanne, 8 Simple Rules to Marry My Teenage Daughter. I think it was called 8 Simple Rules with John Ritter. And then a lot of ad work, tons of jingles, Nike spots, Doritos spots, Taco Bell spots, anything that would put a residual check in my mailbox. Those are the kinds of that's the kind of work that I did in the studio, as well as a ton of records. I mean, it's difficult to say how many records I played on. If I said a couple of hundred, that would probably be accurate. Ronnie Laws at the same time, DeBarge, those people. It was the DeBarge session in particular was when he decided that he would leave the band that was called DeBarge and just do him as DeBarge. I did a couple of records with him. Most famously, I was lucky enough to record a record with a group called Boy Meets Girl, and the single on that was "Waiting for a Star to Fall," which turned huge. Ended up in a lot of movies, and the record sold millions of copies. I'm on Michael Jackson's posthumous release, History. I have a couple of tracks on that record. To be the kind of player I wanted to be, I had to be as versatile as possible and play on a number of different kinds of recording format sessions-wise.
This next project is really exciting. In the mid-1980s, you were part of the new wave synth pop band Zuma 2, playing alongside some notable musicians. 2 Oingo Boingo alumni, bass player Carrie Hatch, and keyboardist Richard Gibbs were both in the lineup. Could you give us some background on this project?
I was fortunate enough to meet my dear friend, now my dear friend for now 40 years, oh my gosh, Mr. Richard Gibbs, who was the keyboard player with Oingo Boingo. And Richard decided that he wanted to leave Oingo Boingo and Danny Elfman behind. There was already rumors that Danny would be leaving the band to carve out a film composing career, which of course we all know he has done quite well from all the films of Tim Burton, and et cetera, et cetera. But Richard decided he wanted to do the same thing, but what he thought about it at first was that he wanted to form his own band, and you said it perfectly. It was Richard Gibbs and Carrie Hatch, Carrie Hatch, bass player, Richard, keyboard player, composer, and they were both members of Oingo Boingo, and they together formed Zuma 2, along with a great singer, saxophone player named Joe Turano. And Joe is just a tremendous singer and instrumentalist. And then another a guitar player named Eric Williams, who I honestly have not seen in a long time, a very long time. I'm not sure what happened to Eric. But the 4 of us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us, did one record for Pasha Records. It was a bit of an ill-fated project, unfortunately. But beyond the record that we did, we had a real successful run in the Hollywood club scene, playing Madame Wong's, the China Room, the Whiskey, of course, the Roxy. We played all the clubs on the Sunset Strip. And yes, synth pop is a good way to describe what the band was. Joe was more of a soul singer, so it put the band kind of in a different place. And K-Rock, which was the alternative radio station at the time, played us a lot. But we just couldn't quite seem to get over the hump. But what the band and what my relationship and my fortuitous meeting of Richard with Richard Gibbs did was it ensured that I would be playing on an illustrious career that Richard carved out as a film composer as well.
you ventured into the pop adult contemporary scene, recording tracks with the duo Boy Meets Girl. This project also included Richard Gibbs. You played on their first 2 albums and added drums to their worldwide top 10 hit, Waiting for a Star to Fall. That must have been exciting. Tell us about it.
The Boy Meets Girl session was for their first record. Now, keeping in mind that the duo Boy Meets Girl had written hits, How Will I Know, Whitney Houston's big hit, etc. So they were hit writers before they decided to become artists themselves and get a record deal, and they did, and they got a terrific record deal. And the lead-off track was that track, Waiting for a Star to Fall, which became an international hit. What's interesting about that song is that my dear friend Denny Fongheiser, who is the drummer with Heart and the drummer with Ann Wilson, tremendous player, he played on the Tracy Chapman first record, her breakthrough record that has Fast Car in it. That's Denny Fongheiser on drums. Anyway, the 2 of us are on that song, which makes it even more fun and that much cooler. Richard was also on the record. Tenor saxophone player extraordinaire Gary Lee Herbig was on that record. He had George Merrill is boy, and Shannon Rubicam is girl, and the 2 of them really got together some of the finest players that Los Angeles had to offer. And fortunately, I was on the list. I had met George back when he came into town from Seattle as a singer, just getting background singing gigs at the place that I mentioned, some of the ad work that I did earlier on in my previous question about my experience in the studio and how that all started. So yeah, both George Merrill, Boy Meets Girl, Shannon Rubicam, and Richard Gibbs were an integral part, have been an integral part, and continue to be, of my musical career for sure.
In 1989, you worked with one of my idols, Jackson Browne. You were on his album World in Motion. I love his music.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say about Jackson that hasn't been said by every musician that's worked with him, every person who's come to see a Jackson show? Certainly one of the finest songwriters of this or any other century, goes without saying. And just an absolute pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to work with him. So the World in Motion record came first, and it came because they were looking for a band to outfit basically that record. He wanted a band specifically, along with some of the side players that he would always use, like Craig Durgee, and of course David Lindley, who passed away recently, the great David Lindley. So Kevin McCormick was the bass player that was working with Jackson at the time. Kevin had also been working with Melissa, Melissa Etheridge. So he was a super busy bass player and also was producing Melissa. But Kevin really liked my playing a lot. We had been doing a lot of session work together, and recommended me to Jackson. And literally the day he recommended me, Jackson called me and said, "Hey, can you come over to the studio in Santa Monica? We're going to start the record. Kevin speaks very highly of you." And that started that part of my career with Jackson, with just doing the record and him having faith. There wasn't really an audition. I just came in and started playing, and it was great. Let's see, it was Kevin Dukes on guitar, Bob Glaub was the bass player, Craig Durgee, and I'm trying to remember the producer and keyboard player's name at the time, and I can't right now. But we finished up the World in Motion record, and then soon right after that, we went and did a concert tour immediately following that record. The record was released, and we went out and did several tours of the East and West Coast, West and East Coast, and it was just an honor and a pleasure. And that was in 1987-ish. I left the band in 1992, and after leaving the band, began doing the Tracy Ullman show, her first show on the Fox network, with Richard Gibbs, one of my mentor as the musical director.
Next to you in the dark.
You are mostly known for your work as part of Korn's backing band. What was that like?
Korn, of all bands and all people that I would ever imagine myself working with as essentially a jazz drummer and a session drummer, I mentioned it earlier in an earlier question. My mentor, once again, Mr. Richard Gibbs, was the one that turned me on to the Korn gig, and it happened. It was an interesting sort of exploration in what the band could do to sort of up the ante and get some enthusiasm back about the band touring. And because at the time that all this was happening, the band Korn was kind of falling apart. Brian Head had left the band. Head had left the band for drug reasons, fired at the time, and was going to go get clean. There was a lot of dissension in the band between the drummer at the time, the drummer that was the original drummer of the band, and the rest of the band. David decided that he wanted to be a restaurateur at this point instead of being in a rock band touring. So there was a lot going on. They decided that they wanted to add a background vocalist as well as a keyboard player and another drummer that would play percussion as well. So we went out and bought a big rig. I went in and I auditioned for the gig, and I only auditioned with a few different people, but I ended up getting the gig, and I toured with Korn from 2005 almost up until 2009, and then Jonathan Davis decided that he wanted to do a solo project, which was the best fun because it was a terrific band. And I did his solo project for the next couple of years, touring the States and Europe as well. So it was a great period of time musically.
Could never find a way to reach my inner self-esteem. So how deep can I go in the ground that I lay if I don't find a way to see through the gray that clouds my mind? This time I look to see what's between the lines. I can see, I'm going blind. I can see, I'm...
In your career, you've gone from jazz to new wave to pop and to new metal. One constant has been Richard Gibbs. Tell us about your association with him and your experience in working in various genres of music.
I've been mentioning Richard a lot in our interview tonight, and I think that it's important because, like I said earlier, he's incredibly important in my musical career. He knew the thing that I admire about Richard is that he totally understands what I can bring to a project, and because of my versatility, I brought my jazz chops and my rock chops and my heavy metal chops and whatever was needed to fulfill, the musical vision that he has for a score. I think that that's what all of us studio musicians do best, is bring the quality of what we do individually as players to the fold, but have the deeper understanding that we're there to serve a purpose and we're getting paid because there's a specific kind of style that wants to be heard, a specific piece of music that needs to be read. And I can tell you that, I've been fortunate over the years to work with many film composers and many television composers, and the fact that I have been, orbiting that universe for well over 50 years now is a gift that I would never ever take for granted.
What are you up to these days? Are there any new projects on the burner?
I'm fortunate at 65 years old to still be playing the instrument that I have been playing since I was 11 years old. And I feel I never take that for granted for 1 second, that I can still sit behind a drum kit and do what I do like I'm 18 years old. I've had some physical issues. I was born with the neurotube defect called spina bifida, and because of that, I've had to have multiple surgeries over the past going on 20 years now, 8 to be exact. My last one was about 5 months ago. And so definite limitations as far as, what I can do and what I can't do physically. But as far as what I'm doing right now, I'm in a local band here in Colorado called Ryan, Chris, and the Rough Cuts. And the band, it's interesting, I'm doing exactly what most musicians would have done when they were 18 years old. I'm touring with a band and with 3 other human beings, sometimes 4 other human beings, in a 10-passenger van with all of our gear right behind us in this 10-passenger van, playing all sorts of different kinds of venues, playing big venues, playing outdoor venues, playing summer shows, going up to Sturgis and playing Bike Week. But honestly, having the time of my life and having the opportunity really to see some of these smaller towns that I never had the opportunity to see when I was touring with Jackson or with Korn or with anybody else. So that's been a gift as well. I've enjoyed that a lot. We just recorded a new record, and it's called Blame It on the Road, because everything that happens right now in our lives, you can blame on the road, all the good stuff and all the bad stuff that happens. I've written 3 books as a consequence, let me say, about my experiences of being on the road. I'm married. We have 5 kids between us, and we have 8 grandkids. I have a house in Mexico that we go to as often as possible. But right now I'm here in Colorado as I speak with you. And I must say that it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
People say that you're a problem child, 'cause you don't have a normal life.
This has been amazing. You're a fantastic drummer, and it's been a real honor to interview you. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thanks once again for having me, brother. I really appreciate it.